this is. Never in my life did I imagine I would have the opportunity to preach from Wesley's pulpit. Today, as we gather as the World Methodist Council, permit me to introduce to you sisters and brothers by other mothers. When I was working as a chaplain at one of the Emory University hospitals in Atlanta, I did a lot of counseling with hospital staff members, particularly when they had personal crises or life events that affected their work. One woman I remember very well was a nurse on one of the surgical units. I met her when her father died, just a few minutes after she had received the telephone call giving her the news. I sat with her in a quiet office near her nurse's station and listened as she shared her feelings about her father, his death, and as she made decisions about what to do next. One source of concern for her was what was going to happen at the funeral. She confided that her worry was because she knew her father had another family besides the one he had with her mother. She knew she had sisters and brothers by another mother, and she wondered how this gathering of two families would play out. The two women who had mothered this man's children knew of each other, but they chose to live in a state of denial of one another's existence. And the children, who were now all adults, had done the same, ignored the existence of one another. Most of them had not even met face to face. So in this moment of loss, the nurse with whom I sat wondered what was going to happen at the funeral, and what in the world would happen if these two families, known but unknown to one another, would find themselves under the same roof. Needless to say, when we prayed for a peaceful funeral. A week later, I made contact with the nurse, who was now back at work, to see how this gathering of sisters and brothers by two mothers had gone. She shared how her anxiety had grown as the day of the funeral drew near, and how difficult it was for her immediate sibling set to even talk about the possible encounter with their other sisters and brothers. But she said, I was surprised. It was all very peaceful. She commented on how easy it was to recognize her other set of siblings, since they all looked just like the father. She spoke of how easy it was to see that they shared in the pain and grief of the loss of a loved one. She commented to me, I was so worried about how different we might be because we grew up in different homes, that I had forgotten what we would have in common, the loss not just of my father, but of our father. She shook her head as she ended the conversation, still in awe of how unreal the whole thing was. Today, as we gather, I think we are much like the nurse in this story, because our cultures have taught us to pay attention to difference. Usually we notice differences first. We are taught and trained to look closely and to observe the ways in which we are different. Different ages, different races, different genders, different ethnicities, different languages, and a myriad of other differences. We can't help but notice these differences, especially in a multicultural city like London, but also in a gathering of the World Methodist Council. All those same differences, not to mention the different denominations we represent: United Methodist, British Methodist, Methodist Church of Ireland, Christian Methodist, Episcopal, A.M.E., A.M.E. Zion, Korean Methodist. This valuing of difference that we are taught is both subtle and blatant in a variety of ways. For example, in the United States, my home, we're just used to official forms that ask us to identify ourselves. What is our racial or ethnic identity? We check the right box. What is our age group? We check another box. What is our income? These different demographics that we so innocently and cooperatively share are used in a variety of ways to sort and measure, prescribe, describe, and plan social services, television shows, radio marketing, advertising. Here's another example. I live in the state of Alabama in the United States, where college football is very important. The two major teams are serious rivals: the University of Alabama Crimson Tide, Bishop Watson, and the Auburn University Tigers. Crimson, red, and white are the colors of the University of Alabama, and blue and orange are the colors of Auburn University. Throughout the state, you see flags and license plates, posters, magnets, stickers, hats, T-shirts, and I even saw women with their fingernails painted in the color of their team. A newcomer like me quickly learned that there is very little appreciation for saying you're neutral, or you don't care, or you root for both teams. Because in Alabama, you are expected to choose one or the other because they're different teams, and no one is expected to support both. I think this is further evidence of the ways in which our cultures encourage us to value difference. But today our text does quite the opposite. The John 10 text teaches us that rather than focus on our difference, we should focus on our alikeness. Jesus has just elaborately described his role in the lives of his people. In John 11:11, Jesus describes himself as the Good Shepherd. And then he goes on to describe how this role of shepherd is unlike that of hireling. The hireling only has temporary interest in the sheep, but he says, because he comes from God, he will lay down his life for the sheep. He is a permanent presence in the lives of sheep. Then, just as Jesus describes himself, he makes a curious statement as if he knew what our response would be. The tendency to take ownership of something just for ourselves. Jesus says to those of us who might tend to think he just belongs to us, other sheep I have that are not of this fold. It is as if Jesus is saying to the church, to each church, and even to each denomination represented here today, that while each of us can claim kinship to him as our shepherd, we must also remember that we are brothers and sisters, albeit by other mothers. Continents, cultures, social movements, schisms, immigration, migration, discrimination, and a whole lot of other forces have given birth to each of the member churches of the World Methodist Council. Different birth mothers, different mothers, yet we are sisters and brothers. We are sisters and brothers. We are the other sheep of the same Jesus who said, there will be one flock and one shepherd. Today's text is not the only one in the biblical record that draws on the image of shepherd. We're all familiar with the 23rd Psalms where it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This image of shepherd is one who creates one of the good shepherd, the one who leads, guides, restores, and anticipates the needs of the sheep. In today's John's passage, the good shepherd is identified as one who knows the sheep by name. The good shepherd communicates with the sheep. And in tumultuous times, the good shepherd hangs in there, making sure the sheep are safe, unlike the hireling who runs away. The good shepherd even risks his life for the sheep. We, the church, are also called to be a good shepherd and to take all of these descriptors seriously in the way we engage our work and the world. But before ending the description of the good shepherd, Jesus added one more quality. The good shepherd, the true shepherd, realizes that there are always other sheep. Other sheep besides the ones that are most visible. They are other sheep. Because if we are of Jesus' flock, we have other brothers and sisters. That fact is the foundation of the World Methodist Council. This text has often been used as a basis for evangelism. And I believe that we can take it to mean that there are others out there who need to be saved, so we must preach to them, bring them to Jesus, and convert them. But I'm not so sure this is just an evangelism passage, but also an identity passage. One designed to help us remember that we are not the only ones. One that can remind us that as Methodists, we are all sisters and brothers. We have a tendency to speak to one another and say we're cousins. But sisters and brothers, I want to remind us that we are not cousins. We are not half sisters and brothers. We are not step sisters and brothers. Even though some of us have come from Mother Africa and others have come as the result of the divorce between Britain and the United States, and others of us are Methodists because of the consequences of slavery, and others are Methodists because of itinerant preachers and missionaries who left the comfort of their own culture and adopted another family in another land. We are sisters and brothers by other mothers. Why is this identity issue and this affirmation of kinship so important? Because it is key to becoming one flock with one shepherd. One. The proposed theme for our 2016 quinquennium suggests. But I want to say to us, being one does not mean we lose our distinct identities, but it does mean we invest in discovering how we are alike rather than get overwhelmed by our differences. Being one does not mean we will all have the same priorities, but it does mean we will respect the priorities and viewpoints of one another. Being one does not mean we ignore our differences, but it does mean we commit to one another that our differences will be stepping stones and not stumbling blocks. After all, we are sisters and brothers, even if it's by other mothers. In the U.S., we sing a song that says, I need you, you need me. We're all a part of God's body. Stand with me, agree with me. We're all a part of God's body. It is his will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive. I pray for you. You pray for me. I love you. I need you to survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I need you to survive. We need one another. We need each other. But you know, even beyond our kinship as Methodists, I believe that Jesus is also calling us to recognize our kinship to all of humankind. And it is this fact that will keep us rooted and grounded in our purpose for being. a purpose that transcends our individual and denominational differences, a purpose that transcends our existence as a World Methodist Council, a purpose that endows us as the sheep of the Good Shepherd to never get so caught up in our own stuff that we forget about others. Here's a story that illustrates what I'm trying to say. 3 young ministers were about to begin their ministry journey. But first, they visited the great wish granter as they headed out into the world. The first minister said to the wish granter, "I have been poor all of my life. I believe if I were rich and prosperous, I could be successful in my ministry." The second minister said to the wish granter, "I've been a nobody all my life. I believe that if I could just be famous and well known, I could be successful in my ministry." The third minister said to the wish granter, "Sir, I just want to serve wherever I can. Wherever I'm sent, I will work. Whether it's a big church or a small church, a hospital, a prison, or school." After a period of silence, the wish granter said to each of them, "Go and come back in 30 years. And tell me what happened." 30 years later, the 3 ministers returned to the top of the mountain and faced the great wish granter again. The first one stood before the wish granter dressed in the finest designer clothes and all the necessary accessories. This minister looked prosperous, and he said, "Thank you for granting my wish." But the wish granter hung his head and said, "What does it profit anyone to gain the whole world and lose your soul?" The second minister stood before the wish granter and began to boast, "Thank you, my name is a household word. My face is on billboards and I'm often on TV and radio. I am finally somebody." The wish granter hung his head and said, "Fool, this night your soul is required of thee." The third minister stood before the wish granter and said, "Well, I don't have much to report. I was called to be a pastor, but I never actually made it to the church where I was called to serve. You see, when I got to the base of the mountain, I heard about some hungry people in Sudan and Ethiopia. So I gathered up the leftovers under the tables of the rich and gave it to them. I heard about the homeless children in Haiti, still suffering from the effects of the earthquake. So I knew I had to stop and do something for them. I continued on, and I really was trying to get to church, but I heard about tornado victims in Alabama and Oklahoma, so I gathered up a team of volunteers and helped them rebuild their homes. Then I heard about racial profiling of Muslims. So I went to a mosque and got acquainted and asked how I could help. Then I heard about the Palestinians and the Syrians and decided I needed to get educated so I could speak truth to power. After all that, I thought I would make it to the church house. But as I continued further, I saw people with HIV/AIDS. So I stopped to sit with them for a while. I saw victims of child abuse and sexual abuse. So I sat with them as well through long days and nights of healing. Then I saw oppression. Women being oppressed, blacks being oppressed, gays and lesbians being oppressed. So I marched for justice, because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I never made it to the church house, but I did the best I could with the time I had. Before he could continue apologizing for what he had not done, the wish granter said, "Truly I tell you, whatever you have done for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, your brothers and sisters by other mothers, you've done it for me." The Good Shepherd knows that our responsibility in ministry extends beyond those who are just like us. It extends beyond those who are like us in terms of race, ethnicity, politics, religion, social class, sexual orientation. Good shepherds know that there are other sheep, not of our fold at the local church. Good shepherds know that there are other sheep even within our Wesleyan Methodist tradition, sisters and brothers by other mothers. But even more important, we are called as the World Methodist Council to remember that there are other sheep, Presbyterians, Baptists, Pentecostals, other sheep, Jewish, Muslims, Hindu, Buddhists, other sheep, whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, other sheep, heterosexuals, and gay, lesbian, transgendered. Other sheep, but they are our sisters and our brothers. And God has called us to be shepherds, to be servants. God has called us to be light in a dark world. God has called us to be faith in a fearful world. God has called us to be hope in a doubting world. And sisters and brothers, we need to remind each other of our true calling, not just to meet and greet one another, but to come together as a family and do what God has called us to do. Mahalia Jackson sings this song, "If I can help somebody as I travel along, if I can help somebody with a word or a song, if I can help somebody from doing wrong, then my living shall not be in vain." Perhaps we can adopt the words of that song in our meeting, that if we can help somebody as we meet this week, if we can help somebody through word or song, if we can commit ourselves to help somebody, then our meeting shall not be in vain. Another song that I also like reminds us of this. You may build great cathedrals, large and small. You can build skyscrapers, grand and tall. You may conquer all failures of the past, but only what you do for Christ will last. Remember, only what you do for Christ will last. But because he is our Father, not John Wesley, but Jesus Christ, because he is our Father, we are all brothers and sisters, red, yellow, black, and white. And we're all precious in his sight. And because we are precious and because we have been called, let us, in this gathering, do something for Christ. Peace unto you.